The next panel, we've met Matthew and Merle, blockchain co-investors, fascinating company and what they're doing fund to funds, investing in all of these companies. Rhett Powers will be joining us. Are you mic'd up? Please join us. Rhett Powers, entrepreneur, writer, author, inventor, and creator. I understand you created a little car that you were driving around when you had your little car, when you had your company. You didn't think I knew that, did you? No. Yeah, there you go. He had a little car that he was driving around when he was building his entrepreneurial business, which he sold very successfully. I'm finding details about you. I'm going to put you on the spot.
In the middle.
Greg Kidd, welcome. Thank you very much. Greg Kidd, hired GIC, a fund company that invests in all sorts of innovative companies. CEO, co-founder, and leader of GlobalID. A supporter investor at Link2. Thank you so much. We hear that everything you invest in turns to gold or dust. So we won't ask you about Twitter and Mr. Musk, or should we, because you're an investor in Twitter? That was a long time ago. Okay. Welcome, thank you. You just flew in from around the world and dovetail some of the experiences that you had.
I was goofing off in Mallorca.
Okay. Okay.
Not a bad place to goof off.
Perhaps just start, with it's.
We have a plan. We have a plan.
Okay, but I want to dovetail on a little bit about the digital stuff that Evelyn was talking about at some point.
It'll be part of it.
Okay,
guaranteed.
Cool. He puts me in my place like this. So does you see what you've done?
Cognitive distance. Good morning. Does everybody need to stand up and get a little blood flowing? Come on. Yeah, stretched out. Yeah.
Physical world.
There we go. Right. You something you can touch, right, and feel. And...
Yeah.
All right. So digital payments and the future of. It's a fascinating question, right? Who here likes to get paid? Yeah? Yeah? Who likes it to be immediate and get it quickly? Yeah? So we'll talk a little bit about that today and the future of some of that and what that looks like. But Matthew has a treat for us. A little thought-provoking.
Yeah, we're going to do something that I've the last couple of days, with your help, by the way, because I've asked a lot of you some questions. I've been trying to get my head around, and I'm going to share something that is half formed. And I want to do this, and I think it will tee up very well the interview, the fireside chat we're about to do with Greg. But it's a thought experiment. Now, you guys are going to have to turn off your second screen, and the people listening online, the 100 or 200 people around the world, just for a moment, turn off the second screen, because there's going to be a moment in what's about to happen that will actually blow your mind. And I'm still blown in the sense I don't quite understand where this is all going to head. And that unlocking moment will only happen for you if you're paying attention, John Murray. So I can see you. So, and you. The second screen is a part of the story, but just for a moment. The key question is, why do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? And this book has that question in it quite a bit, and it's a question Alice and I ask a lot. So this is a role play. We're in a bookstore. This is the guy behind the counter. I come in and I say, can you get me a copy? Do you have a copy of Rhett Powers' great new book called Book of Action? And the bookstore owner says, oh my gosh, that's one of our best-selling books. It's almost always out. I don't think I do have a copy. I say, I'm very disappointed. It's a great book. I really want it. It's an award-winning book. And he says, well, let me see. Goes away, comes back, and he says, I'm actually out, but I was reserving one copy for myself. I will sell you the copy. And I feel, oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I pull out a $100 bill, And I say, because I know this book is so valuable, please keep the change. He gives me the book, he puts it in a paper bag, he prints out the receipt, he puts it in the paper bag, he hands it over to me. And then he says, are you a Barnes & Noble member? And I says, I am. And I pull out my wallet, I open it, I take out my my loyalty card, I give it to him, he does something with it, I don't know what, he passes it back to me. And then he says, he reaches down under the counter, he pulls out this piece of paper, and he says, this is from Rhett Powers, and this is a free 30-minute coaching session, because he's one of the world's best executive coaches for professional athletes and technology CEOs, and he puts it into the bag. I take the bag, I say, thank you very much, and I leave. Why do we do what we do? Because that is not just a payment, it's a transaction. And it's a transaction in the context of a relationship. And we unbundled it. Why did we unbundle that transaction? And the reason it's an unbundled transaction, and you got the parts, right? There was a physical transfer of goods. There was a payment process. There was a paper-based invoice which represented my ownership record, so that when I left the bookstore, if they stopped me and said, are you stealing any books? I would have shown them the invoice. If it was Best Buy, that's for real. You can't leave without your invoice. It's also a guarantee of return, because if I'd opened the book and half the pages were blank, I would have needed that to get a replacement product, right? So it's more than just a receipt. It's a property record and it's a guarantee. And there was a loyalty process twice, once for Barnes & Noble and once for Rhett Powers. And it was completely unbundled. Why? Well, because it grew up that way. It grew up unbundled and it grew up physical. And we began to dematerialize it. So, you know, there's the bank transactional process, which works on computers, but they're separate from the retailer loyalty system, which is on a different set of computers, which is separate from the Rhett Powers loyalty program, which is on a different set of computers. And they don't speak to each other and they're not networked. But why do we continue to do it that way? By the way, we've dematerialized the book because Rhett's books and my books and Alison's books are downloadable from Kindle everywhere, Amazon, Apple, Smashwords, everywhere. So we dematerialized the book and we dematerialized the bookstore. I didn't need to go into the bookstore. I could have just clicked on Amazon, but it's still a fragmented payment, no. Transaction, no. Relationship,
Yes.
One-on-one marketing, personalized marketing. And now this is the bit that is blowing my mind. NFT, there is no token. There's no token. It's about code, software, fully networked-based computers and databases communicating in real time, such that this little interaction I had in the bookstore, which could have been dematerialized, everything connected, processed, communicated in real time, such that my ownership record, the good, the relationship, the payment, the loyalty, the goodwill, all occurred simultaneously, recorded immutably in posterity. And if that wasn't enough to blow your mind, because this is going to blow every industry, every business, every financial company, and everything they do, just like the internet did. If that wasn't enough, and this is the part that I'm struggling with, and if you aren't struggling with this, I'd be surprised. It's all code. So we could have attached anything in the world that we could put into code into that same dynamic. So it could have been that a triggering event occurred such that some other author got a commission, because that other author, I said, gave me some information that I put into my book. So I want them to get a fractional commission on the sale of the book. And no one else in the world even knew that they'd help me write the book. They were the ghostwriter. We didn't have a ghostwriter. Or they were an example I used, and I feel obliged to give them a commission. Or it could be that Rhett Powers' favorite coached athlete is a star quarterback, and they've given him some signatures so that he wants to say, if you go beyond the 30-minute coaching session and you sign up for a year of personalized coaching with Rhett Power, he will get you into a box at the next Super Bowl. And it's all written into the same code of this little transaction. And you start going down this path and you realize that a payment is a component of a transaction. A transaction is a component of a relationship. And anything that is of value can be written into code and connected seamlessly real-time into a network blockchain-based world. And that's where we're heading. And don't get hooked up by words like NFT, STO. That's not the point. The point is it's information, content, networked, computerized world. And we are in it whether we like it or not, and we're dematerializing everything. And as you heard on the last panel, that includes our identities, our meaning, our self-worth, at least for the next generation, is being dematerialized as well. So having said all of that, Rhett, back to you.
Thank you for making the book so popular, guys. Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got another one coming out in the fall you can help me with. And I think what you're just talking about goes further in terms of what we're going to see. The businesses we're going to see disruption in, right? Why at that point then do I need HarperCollins or Wiley to publish the book? But that's a whole nother topic for discussion. Your floor, what do you see in payments, Greg? What do you see in the future? What is your crystal ball?
Well, I arrived here from Star Trek Future, so
Okay, good.
There has to be a way to pay for dilithium crystals, right, whether you're a Romulan or a Cleon. But going in the other direction, going back historically, my journey on payments goes back. I had done a startup, public. This young kid named Jack Dorsey hacked into it. It all blew up. He went to massage school. I went to the Kennedy School for Public Policy. I went to work for this little shop called the Board at the Federal Reserve in the payments group. And sometime later, after Jack had been nanny, when he started Twitter for me, he started this little company called, or had this idea to start this company called Square.
Right.
And so, I don't know if you know, but Jack Dorsey has no background in payments, nor did his founder. So we had this session at the Pelican Inn near my house where they asked a lot of basic questions. Who can take a payment? How does PayPal work? How does the payment system work? And Jack is a man of few words, and there was this period of silence, and he was absorbing this information, and I was just relaying it as, like a suit, a Fed person being. And he said, after a pause, he says, Greg, payments are very intimate. And this is kind of like Jack. And as usual, this is the reason why I'm not the second person on Twitter. I'm only number 62, is I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. And nobody in all my time at the Federal Reserve had ever used the word payments and intimate in the same sentence. And so, I paused and I had to ask Jack, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, you don't pay someone unless you trust them. And what he had taken from what I had said is all the controls we have around payments are all based on worrying about what happens when there's a lack of trust. And yet, most payments are between two parties that already trust each other, just like, if a couple's married, they don't need to have protection because they trust each other. And Jack's observation was, what would a payments reality be like if you built it on the presumption of trust rather than the presumption of the lack of trust? And therein, Square was born, which was the concept that a whole group of people who'd never been able to take a payment before could take a payment. And it was the beginning of an exploration that now has happened with Bitcoin and whatnot, of like trustless transactions where you can trust the transaction is good, even though there's not a central authority. And so the key innovation that's happened in our time that's moved from that initial insight about intimacy and payments to now, how does that work in a world where you don't have to ask permission to do something? And this is really the cusp of DeFi, Web 3.0, is what's it gonna look like when all these transactions that Matthew just talked about can happen. And when it happens, there's this good positive feeling between the parties. It's this intimate experience. And so payments at the end of the day, whether you're a communist or a capitalist, it's an exchange society. And you don't do things with counterparties unless you trust them. And so that brings in these questions of like, do you need to know something about their identity, their reputation if you're dealing with a stranger? How do you get comfortable with a stranger? And DeFi is all about things happening with a stranger. Now, I'm also a kind of like guns and badges guy. Like, I come from the Fed, I'm a suit. I'm like, what about compliance? What about sanctions? And so the question is, how do you have these transactions happen in a world that is going to be increasingly decentralized, no central authority, and yet you're still going to have privacy preservation when things are immutably being recorded on a blockchain. And they're going to be compliant. How are you going to live in a world that's not Orwellian, not Mad Max, not creepy Mark from Facebook, Libra, not bureaucratic GDPR where you like move all this data around and they wave a magic wand and it's like Men in Black. Forget that you ever saw this data. The right to be forgotten. Like somebody forgot to tell the European regulators that there isn't a time machine yet. How are you going to make all this work? And so the question for me in payments, the really exciting thing is, yes, we've had bank rails. Yes, we've had card rails. What are these digital rails going to look like when there's decentralization, yet it's compliant, secure, private, and consumer friendly enough that everybody can be included, not just the up-de-dup. And so I love hearing about games earlier on. Like, it's just one big game. Like, we're all entering into this metaverse where there's not a boundary between the brick and mortar world, the digital world, and really the metaverse world. It is going to be fungible across all three. And I think that we see the pieces, but I can tell you, it's probably not going to include UST.
That's actually what I wanted to ask you about and follow up with that and dig into that a little bit more. What is the U.S. Treasury? What is the U.S. government and the European Union? How are they going to slow this down? How are they going to put those guardrails on to protect money laundering? And
so look, there's a bunch of suppositions in that. Slow down, protect. Why do you slow down to protect? Maybe you should accelerate to protect. And what is protection anyhow, which is this point of trust. But keep going, Greg, sorry.
No, but you hear people talk about funding terrorism and funding
so let me just, I will amplify the point, but I want to hear what Greg has to say as well. So when the world created the internet, TCP/IP, and we digitalized all of communications and content, and today everyone benefits from that in very many ways, the regulators saw that this was an important innovation and they actually accelerated it.
Okay.
They did. So things like safe harbor and the willingness to allow experimentation made America the global innovator to some extent. And we accelerated the rollout of the internet, and we have all benefited. Now, there are adverse consequences, unexpected collateral damage. I'm not saying the new world doesn't bring new challenges, but it was accelerated by the regulators. And so I guess the question would be, what is the path in which this future gets accelerated by the regulators, and why would that be beneficial? We shouldn't presuppose that they're in the world to block it and hold on to traditional ways of doing things, because the key question, why do we do what we do, and is it a good thing? And I don't think the regulators are there to enforce negative externalities of the past if we all know it doesn't make sense. So anyhow, back to Greg.
So there's another battle going on, and this is kind of the Andreessen versus Jack battle. You probably heard about it, Web 2.0 versus Web 3.0. And I think Jack's comment was Web 3.0, same people as Web 2.0. And I'm like a poster child for that. So I did well in Web 2.0, first money at places like Coinbase, or, was chief risk officer at Ripple, and just was around for a bunch of this Web 2.0 stuff. But here I am, I'm at the Web 3.0 party, so guilty as charged, don't want to mix the next party. And so, but there's a fundamental question there of I don't think the Web 2.0 world is just going to roll over. There's companies like Apple and Google, and they're doing pretty good with their business models, and Microsoft and Amazon and these governments, they're doing pretty good with their national regulations and whatnot. But the Web 3.0 world, the real Web 3.0, the Star Trek-y one I want to live in, it's dude, if you're talking about interoperability, that's not going to work for Facebook isn't interoperability. They sue your ass if you try to use that data in an interoperable way. They come after you with a CFAA, and they want to put you down under a felony rap charge, and they're not alone. So this data that's done very well in these silos, those guys, whether it's open banking and banks, they're not gee, let's just make it really easy for our users to be interoperable. And governments, including the United States, haven't been all that oh yeah, let's just team up with the Europeans. To the US, the Europeans have 3 heads. We regulate, let alone the Russians or the Chinese. Very unlikely that governments are going to get together and work on an interoperable world. Kumbaya, right? So if this is going to happen, it's going to have to be a protocol-led approach by these folks that stumble through, just like we stumbled through to figure out the World Wide Web and come up with DNS and a protocol level approach like SMTP. So for this to take off, there's going to have to be an identity system. And look, I come from Twitter, there ought to be a namespace. Everybody ought to have a unique identity. Everybody across all the countries, across all the companies. And just no two people can have the same name. And to that, you collect a bunch of credentials. Could be that you're over 18. Could be that you can fly a helicopter. Could be that you speak Swahili. Whatever it is, it ought to be enough so that when you go and there's a relying party, they can trust you enough to give you permission to do what you want to do. And so that cannot come from a central authority. It cannot come from a country. It cannot come from a company. I'm not anti-company. I'm not anti-country. It's just that those guys and gals can't do it. So the protocol that's got to come, I don't know, from those same kids, my 15-year-old daughter playing in the metaverse, her and that group of people are going to have to figure this out. And there is going to be pushback.
Is it one of those existing platforms, Facebook, Twitter, that does this?
Well, they're on the wrong side of the ledger. So they can talk, Twitter can talk about wanting to decentralize Twitter, like Blue Sky, and mea culpa, we're beginning to feel a little bit bad. There was a saying at Twitter, which is Twitter is too important to be left to Twitter. Right? And what that means is there's more value in these networks as networks, but those networks, to be really powerful, would go beyond the boundaries of a regular company. They'd have to be run like a public utility because they are a public good. And yet that is not what their charter and governance structure is like. You don't vote yourself 10x votes like at Facebook so that you can basically have a super majority. We have a name for that in the rest of the world. That's like a dictatorship. Maybe it's a benevolent dictatorship, but see how that's working for you, right? So it's unlikely that it's going to come. Gary Gessler over at the SEC, he's like, he doesn't care what the Chinese or the Russians or the Europeans think about what's a security or not. He's made it very clear. If it's a security, we'll regulate it, which is the same philosophy as Tony Soprano. Right. If you're on my turf, you're going to be paying me. And, well, what's the extent of your turf? Whatever I say it is. Right? That's just the way it works. And again, I'm not anti those organizations, but from a governance point of view, that's where you end up and get to. So, you know, the fun thing right now, the tumult in Web 3.0 and DeFi is it's a free-for-all. And what we just know is like, you know, UST melted down last week. Like I'm looking to figure out how to short USDT, right? Because I'm not sure they're good for it, right? And I'd sure like to borrow at $1, sell it, and buy it back at 50 cents. Sounds like a good trade to me. So that kind of like centralization doesn't work either. So, you know, it's early innings on DeFi and Web 3.0, and I can't find those episodes that explain to me how like credits work for Romulans and everybody's buying those dilithium. So somebody figured this out, but Gene Roddenberry kicked off before he gave us this episodes that explained how Star Trek works. That's up to us to figure out, and that's where we're putting our bets financially. And so that's the interesting thing. So we're like, I don't know. I'm listening to what my 15-year-old daughter tells me. She's got more sense than any probably of us because she's in it to win it, and she's doing it. And we heard a little bit about that. And so, and you're writing books for teenage girls too.
I am. I've written a couple of novels. That's what he's referring to. Yeah.
So,
well, you're looking at me. So on the digital, so the prior session was about digital entertainment, digital avatars, NFTs, and at that seminal moment, about a third of the hands went up saying, "I invest in digital entertainment," and 2/3 didn't go up. And then the follow-on question from Kareem was, "Has this panel changed your view on that?" And I just want to amplify this point now. You know, I've got the microphone, and given what Greg just said, the digital natives are different from most of the people in the room. Some people in the room are digital natives, but we did a lot of research on that. We called it by a different name, Generation C, the connected generation. We spoke to thousands and thousands of them when I was a booze partner running the digital practice globally for booze. And it really opened my mind. I also have 5 kids, so I was living it and I was researching it, and they are different, and it's fundamental differences. And I'm just going to do a little thought experiment really, really fast, just to illustrate this. If I ask you, no, you're a digital native. If I ask someone who isn't, you know, how many friends do you have? They'll say, I have so many friends. I don't define it, they define it. They'll say, probably I've got 50 friends. I say, how many of them do you share your innermost feelings with? They'll say, oh, 5 or 7. I'll say, how often do you meet your friends? They'll say, maybe once a month or 2. I'll say, you know, I'll ask some other questions, but one of them will be, have you ever, do you have any friends who you've never met in person? And they'll laugh. And then I'll go to a digital native and I'll say the same questions, and they'll say, well, I've probably got a larger universe of friends, but I certainly share my feelings with more of them. I talk to them much more frequently, okay? And so at this point already, by the definition of the boomer friend, the digital natives actually have more of them, and they behave with them in a more friendly way, right? So already you're on weak ground if you're going to say virtual relationships are not meaningful. And then when you get to the last question, they have intimate friends they've never met physically. And so then you have to ask the question, why do we think that a friend means an intimate physical relationship? Because we don't even behave with our friends in the way they do. We don't share our feelings, we don't share our emotions, and we don't speak to them often. Right? And yet they're doing all of those things. So they're being more friendly with their friends, and many of them are virtual. And that's another unlocking moment, because then you have to say, why do we do what we do in the way that we do? Why do we define friendships as being bounded by physical interaction? That is a legacy of the past, and there's nothing that says friendship is a purely physical-based relationship. And so anyhow, the digital natives are different, they are running ahead, and they cannot be constricted by today's legacy regulations and approaches. And whether we like it or not, they will be in a majority quite quickly. They're already 50% of the American population is 45 years and younger. In Manhattan, 2/3 of the population is 45 and younger. Similar in Miami, That's why the mayorships of both places went to people that said, we're pro-innovation, pro-Bitcoin and crypto. And that's rippling now through the electoral process globally. The digital natives are passionate. They are pro this, everything we're describing, and they're beginning to capture a majority of the votes. But even if they don't do that today, 8 years, 12 years, in 20 years, they will set this story and they will define who is the head of the SEC, et cetera, et cetera. It will be a digital native.
I had an interesting conversation last night at dinner. We were talking about continent of Africa and emerging markets. Is there progress being made in emerging markets with payments and being able to move money more freely and more easily so that business?
Yeah, they're way ahead of us.
Businesses could grow. I mean, but it's that whole, the continent is there's a perception that it's hard to do business there. Is that?
So I would say first, the country with the most advanced payment system is India. So they have the India stack, and you can pay from a Paytm wallet to some other wallet. Doesn't matter. You don't have to have the same wallets. They have Aadhaar, so they have a identity system that's got over like 1 billion people in the database. I talked to them. I said, like, why don't you just do Aadhaar for the whole world? And they're like, oh, it is for Indians. I can say, I know I'm talking like this. I married into an Indian family, so and I have Indian daughters, and they're like, and I'm like, dude, it's fingerprints. It's like, you can't, they're like, well, it's not for the Pakistanis. And I'm like, it's fingerprints. You can't tell that they're Pakistani. And they're like, whoa, you are right. So look, they got bio, but of course it's like kind of Big Brother and stuff. But the point is, in terms of interoperability, it worked. In terms of like WeChat and whatnot, and Ant Finance, like they're doing 7x transaction volume in China for what Visa and MasterCard are doing in the US. I mean, the world out there is happening. If you go to like Kenya, like M-Pesa was the first to show like mobile phone to mobile phone. So it's out there. So we're heavily invested in Africa. Yeah, Africa's like a mess, but you can say the US is a mess. You could say the Ukraine, like there's lots of messes in different ways, but there's innovation everywhere.
Where should we be looking to? And I mean, you're not giving investment advice. Where should we be looking, and what kind of company should we be looking at to invest in?
So again, I'm, I got lucky because when this guy with a Russian accent came in and told me about this thing, like, oh, it's going to be faster and cheaper than any other system out there, so it could replace the NASDAQ and all payment systems. I'm like, where are you from? He goes, I am from the Soviet Union, and that was Anatoly, and his idea was Solana. And so like Benny Hill, who says like, well, I'd buy that for $1. I'm like, okay, here's a check. So like, yeah, it's down, but still like it's a 1000x because like the innovation is coming all over. It's not like in the early days where for me to like walk to Twitter, that's 5 blocks. To walk to Square, over to Coinbase, over to Ripple, everything was 5 blocks. Those days are over. And so we're seeing these innovations coming from everywhere around the world. And some of these innovations are not company-based, they're protocol-based. And I was here in Lisbon back in, November of last year drinking the crack Kool-Aid of Solana. And I didn't like listen to the conferences. I just looked at the developers who were there. And I'm like, where are the developers? Are they like going to work for the banks? Are they going to work for the Web 2.0 companies? Are they like signing up to like work on the next version of Twitter? I don't think so. They're like at that conference and they were kick-ass. And like, I had no idea what they were talking about, but I knew I was at the right party.
Right. I want to build on that. So, I've heard Greg very many times say that he thinks life is a box of chocolates and he's Forrest Gump. He just happens to be in the right place at the right time and walk into the right room. And by observation, it's true in the sense Greg gets himself into the right rooms and he does so, he does roam around and these people are everywhere. So he's in Lithuania, he's in Malaga, he's in Portugal, he's in everywhere. Now, Alice and I at Blockchain Co-Investors, we're not Greg, so we took a different strategy. It's the Hamilton strategy. Have you all seen Hamilton? It's like, I want to be in the room where the deals are getting done. But I can't be in all those rooms. And so what Alice and I, as a strategy, was created the leading blockchain fund of funds so that we give capital to the people who are in the right rooms. And we're in 45 funds, and those funds all have Greg kids. So they're in the rooms where the deals are getting done, and a little bit of our capital is bleeding into every deal. And it's highly diversified. So I also believe in diversification. Greg happens to be maybe more better than most of us at picking the eventual winners. We don't necessarily have quite the same talent, so we spread the money a bit wider, which is called diversification. You still plan to catch them in the net. And then the Link2 platform, I just want to say, honestly, truly, yes, they are later stage, but we're trying to, I think we are all trying to catch some winners and get them to agree to be on the Link2 platform. And Greg has introduced some, we've introduced some, other people have introduced some. If you look down the list of the Link2 companies, truly, some of those are the global winners of the future. However, the valuations are late or mid to late stage. They're not early stage, which is where we try and invest. I think that's fair, right, Greg? We mostly invest early stage.
Any questions? Let's open it up.
Hold on, I'll give you the mic, thanks.
How much time do we have?
We're over time.
We are running late. We'll push lunch out a little bit.
Is this working? Yeah. I come from a little bit different perspective than most folks here. I'm very new to this whole world. I also come at this as a systems theorist, so I try to take what you guys are saying and abstract out what the core idea is. Especially when you started, Matthew, talking about your little analogy of the bookstore, and then you, Greg, and it reflects back to the avatars. Is that from my view, is that the real core idea behind all of these things is that every human being must have a unique digital identity that does not sit on some company's or government server. Without that, none of this can happen. That's, am I
Well, I would say you can have more than one identity, but no two people or organizations can have the same identity. So I'm a big believer, if you liked Hamilton, when the Federalist Papers were written, they were written pseudo-anonymously. So sometimes you want to use your night identity versus your day identity, but at the end of the day, when a bomb goes off and they come and knock, they want to make sure they're knocking on the right door. But yeah, we are suggesting that you can have more than one identity, you can be pseudo-anonymous, but it's got to point back to a real identity, whether it's a person or in the case of an organization, and you're like, you're buying super yachts or mansions in London, there's got to be an ultimate beneficial owner behind whatever. That doesn't mean that you have to live in a privacy shredding world. You can only get to see what that final identity is with due process. But yes.
I just want to this is one of those moments that I'm still struggling with, which is people have identities, corporations have identities, devices have identities. Data in an immutable blockchain world, data has an identity. A transaction can have an identity. A relationship can have an identity. That the notion of identity, you can't think of it as being a passport. It's so much more important than that, because as an example, a transaction with an identity becomes provenance, and provenance is critical for most of us all of the time. And we just don't really grow up thinking like that.
But if you abstract that out, even those identities you're talking about, to my thinking, it must link back to a unique context-independent identity. The only context is the human being, anyway.
So I would say there's a level of abstraction, and it's really what made the World Wide Web possible. Before the World Wide Web, there was TCP/IP, there were governments and universities using it. But when we did something that humans have created, which is language, like we're bad at remembering like 8 numbers, but we can remember hundreds and thousands of names with reputations. Like our minds are, from a linguistic point of view, we're very good at associating not just identity, but reputation. Like tiger, run, like, oh, friendly tiger, that's Sam. Like don't have to, like, we're very good, both in general and very specific, at making this cognitive compendium. It's like Balzac, the hundreds of characters that appear across Balzac novels. He weaves them all together. We as human beings are very good at that. And so to build something on top of what is unique about humans, which is language, and it's the name, not the number. Underneath, yes, there's a public and private key. That's what leverages our cognitive powers, both as individuals and collectively. And so at the end of the day, behind every company, behind everything, there's got to be, in our world of agency, an ultimate beneficial owner. And it's kind of sad because people said, like, this is the whole problem with slavery. Slaves belong to someone. Until we eliminated slavery, we weren't living in this world I'm talking about. Now it's the problem is like pets. Like, I'm sorry, the pet, you're my dog, I love you, but you belong to me. You're an item, which you have an identity, but ultimately, at least as we've composed the world, at least as I see it, there's always an ultimate beneficial owner. And that really matters when it comes to sanction screening. It really matters when it comes to privacy. It really matters when it comes to trust. We're going back to the time in the tribes when you knew everybody in your tribe. The only difference now is we're living in a tribe that's the size of the whole world. We still want it to be that personable, but we want it to scale. But we don't want it to scale the way that like George Orwell scaled, right? We don't want it to scale the way like Web 2.0 companies want it to scale, which is the Highlander approach. My sword is big, I killed everyone else, I win. Or in that movie, the movie in the future with Sylvester Stallone, when he like solves the crime, they go like, well, we're all going out to celebrate. And I'm like, well, where are we going? We're going to Taco Bell. Well, Taco Bell sucks. Like, why are we going to Taco Bell? Well, they won the food wars, so everything's Taco Bell. Like, we don't want one of those type of identity solution. Well, I don't. Maybe you like Taco Bell. But yeah, there's a namespace. It's language. Humans created it. Yeah, dolphins talk too, but we're very, very sophisticated with what we've done with language. That's what makes the World Wide Web possible. Coca-Cola.com, you're going to get a Coke. You don't care what's underneath. It made us all. There's not a Brazilian internet, a Chinese internet. It's an internet. It's the World Wide Web. And that's the difference between the web and the internet. And we need to do that with identity. And if we do that, we get a Web 3.0 that's bottom up as opposed to top down.
Language is information that's overlaid on a particular noun, let's say, and it communicates whatever you want to communicate.
It does. It
So station at lunch.
So
In between mouths, just.
let me get one more. Anybody else? I know you had one. Let's make them quick.
Sorry.
Yes, back.
Apologies.
Greg, a question for you. Talking about identity, I wanted to know if you could maybe expand a little bit about GlobalID and the partnerships with Link2, Uphold, and anything else in the future you got working with.
Well, all GlobalID, it's just a repeat of what we just talked about. It's just the concept, and it shouldn't be GlobalID. Like, GlobalID is just a company. But at the top of the pyramid just has to be the idea that everybody is self-sovereign. And I mean everybody. Everybody can get an identity. And with that identity, it's a concept of a bundle of sticks. The bundle of sticks means I ought to be able to own my name, my credentials. Like if I graduated from a university, I shouldn't have to like, oh, please, will you give me my diploma? It's like, no, dude, I graduated. Give me the goddamn credential. I can use it where I want, like, or it's like a big lawsuit with LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn owns my resume. I'm like, no, I own it. I made it public. You don't get to like sue people for using what I like. It's my stuff. It's my bundle of stuff. But it's the same thing with data. Like, if I had a social graph and my name was Donald Trump on Twitter and I had 80 million followers and I get kicked off, I shouldn't lose my 80 million followers. They're following me. They use Twitter to do it. It's my social graph. It's my tweets. If I was following someone, I wrote a paper and I put a footnote in, I ought to be able to make sure that footnote doesn't break later because now they say black is white and before they said white is black. Like, I need to be able to preserve all my files, everything I've ever received, sent, links I've relied on. It's mine. I don't have to worry, oh, did Dropbox lose it? Did I put it on a hard? No, it's attached to my identity. And then finally, all value. Every piece of value, every crypto and whatnot, it's just part of my bundle of sticks. I shouldn't have to worry like, oh, they like froze it or this, or it's mine. It just attaches to my identity. So whether it's credentials, and it comes back, we have the avatar, like that's my avatar, it's mine. You can't take it away from me. It doesn't matter whether I'm in this metaverse or that metaverse, it's mine. And I don't mean to sound political, it's not anti-corporate, it's not anti-government, but it's just bottom up, and we grant powers to corporations and governments. And that's kind of an American concept.
We cede power to them.
Yeah, we cede power to them.
Yeah.
But
We have a question up here.
Yeah, that's,
So I think you are touching on very interesting topics, and so since all these transactions at some point are going to be public, because the purpose of having actually a public ledger and having blockchains, where do you see utility in anonymous transactions and also the use of zero knowledge proof, for example, since all these transactions are going to be public, and which use case you see for anonymous transactions and the use of zero knowledge proof?
so this is this very critical word of public, and then there's this word on private. Like there's always these movies where somebody says, well, I tweeted that privately, and people are like, ho, 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 ho. Hilarity ensues when you think you like tweeted private. Like if it's public, it's public. All right, so when a transaction happens between two parties, like in the European GDPR thing, it's like, okay, I'm just gonna give you all this data, you really take good care of it, and then later on, I'm gonna tell you to forget that it happened, right? And like, I'm like, what? Like I come from the Nancy Reagan world, which is just say no. When somebody says, I need all this data to do this transaction, I'm like, hell no. You need to know enough to know that I'm not like the next Osama bin Laden or whatever, right? And you can do that with a zero knowledge proof. I will give you a token because you have to be compliant, because you have to comply with all these, you know, OFAC rules to make sure you're not like, you know, Putin's girlfriend or whatever. But you only get to cash that token in if you really need to like file a suspicious activity report, there's been fraud. You have to prove, this is the due process thing. Yeah. You have an access token, but you haven't actually gotten the data. This is how you meet that travel rule requirement. You don't need the data, you need access to the data. And as a bank regulator, it used to be, people said, like, the examiner came and he wants the key to the server room. And like, oh, well, we're in the cloud. And the regulator looks like, oh, the cloud, the weather, all your data is in the cloud. Where's the key to the server room? I'm like, no, dude, it's access to the data. We're not actually moving all the data around. It's delegated authority. You can get access to that data, so we don't create honeypots for hackers to go after and say, bingo, I just hacked whatever, you know, and now I have 80 million, 800 million records. All the data is an access token that you get to know, but only with due process. And society can put in place what hurdles there are before we unwrap. So it is kind of like, to use a 2.0, Apple Pay. The merchant doesn't get to know who you are. They get a token. If there's a problem, we can go back and find out like who was involved, but it's still privacy preserving. It's zero knowledge proofs. You need enough information to know, yeah, you're not like in Nevada, you are over 18 and you're a member of the Bored Ape Yacht Club, so you get to see this video or you don't. And that's it. And so that's a rewriting of the rules. I saw a great exhibit. So first, we bought physical items at physical stores. It was called Sears. Then we bought physical items at virtual stores. It's called Amazon. Then we bought virtual items at virtual stores. It's called Netflix. But in this next version of the world we're hearing about, you're just gonna buy stuff and it's not gonna be from Netflix. Maybe Oprah said something, or like, you know, your kid, you're just gonna have a direct transaction between the payor and the payee, and there's no centralized institutions. And to Matthew's point, there'll be a bunch of smart contracts. You get this much, you get that much. That's where it's going, that creator economy. If you look at those stats of like how much money people that are living in the creator economy are getting from these platforms versus what they're getting from the 2.0 platforms, goodbye. I don't know how long it's gonna take. I just wanna make sure, even though I made a lot of money in the 2.0 world, that like, I'm now in the 3.0 world, because I wanna like, before I die, I wanna get to the Star Trek land, and if I don't get there, I want my daughter to get there. And I'd rather be part of that world, and I'd like to see that world be completely inclusive. Because if it's not inclusive, then it sucks. I'm still gonna go somewhere with all my fancy 3.0 stuff, and somebody's gonna say like, what? And I'm not gonna get my Coca-Cola, right? So I want everybody to be part of this. It's good for them, it's good for me. It's more fun to be in the 3.0 world than the 2.0 world. 2.0 world wasn't bad, but it's a little long in the tooth.
We have a question from Jordan.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Greg, for being in the room with us all today. Final question is, if you went to $0 tomorrow, hopefully not.
Sorry, if I went to what?
$0.
Oh, no money.
No assets.
Oh.
No money, but you know
Well, I have to
everything.
get up to that. A lot of times I've been below $0.
But
It's called a negative
But let's say you get a
number.
bank loan for $100, $100,000 even. Where would you put that $100,000 in crypto and blockchain technology?
So that's like that old thing, like if you owe someone $100, you know, you have a problem. If you owe them $100 million, they have a problem. I remember when I went to my companies, it was like in technical bank, and the bank, I'm like, look, they're still sending me wine. Of course they're sending you wine. You owe them $100 million.
And they want you to drink it.
So, you know, this thing of like the poker analogy is, do you play poker the same way if the chips you're playing with are the chips you need to send your kids to college, right? Versus like, dude, somebody just gave me the red chips, blue chips, they're just different colors. Like, you know, sounds like it's fun to have a bigger stack of chips. So it depends on what kind of investor you are. So I don't want to really give investment advice. For Hard Yakka, we don't have any LP's money. This is just stupid money that we made because, like, you know, Twitter was actually, like, despite my girlfriend at the time calling it Twizzler, you know, it became something. It wasn't worth that much. And then Square, and so you just have this money that if you can afford to lose it, then you're in this situation where, you know, you have like 9 out of 10 things you invest in go belly up. But you're in a world now where a number of these investments are 1,000 to 1 return. And people say, well, you take such big bets. I'm like, dude, when there's 1,000 to 1 prizes, how can you not make 300 bets? Because, you know, with 1,000 to 1, you're going to get 3x your money. So if you're not making all those bets, you're taking a risk. And so that boiling frog analogy, like the risk of not taking a risk is bigger than taking a risk. And the definition of a hero is like a coward with no other options. And so once you realize you're in that situation from an investing point of view, and it can sound like FOMA, you know, you look at the person, their lips and their stuff, and it's like being on a date, and you really like the date, you know, you're looking at them, you're not even listening to what you're saying, but you're like, wow, this really feels good. And so to some of the investor pitches, you're making an assessment of like, it's like my definition of affirmative action. People are like, well, how do you feel about affirmative action? And these people, they don't have the same qualifications as this like old white guy. And I'm like, look, I'm not looking at where they're at. I'm looking at the slope they're on. Where did they come from? What's the trajectory? And so when you're looking at people and you're making that assessment, like, I didn't know what the hell Jack was talking about. I'm just like, but there's like something about the slope that that person is on. And so if you're in those places where people are on that slope, you're not picking individual winners. Of course, yes, there are going to be individual winners and there's going to be losers, but and it sounds like FOMA, but you're around that environment. Like it was good to be in Paris in the interwar years and hang out with Virginia Woolf and like, you know, and that crowd, the Bloomsbury, like be around those people, whether it's for art, whether it's for science, like, because I don't know, when there's 1,000 to 1 returns, like that's the place where the 1,000 to 1 returns are gonna come from. It's not like joining the rotation program at Goldman Sachs coming out of business school, which is like what I went to. I was one of those ticket punchers. We both worked at Booz Allen. It was like a place to punch your ticket. That's not the world anymore. Like the kids that like Jun, my investment partner, his son was like, dude, I'm not going to college, man. I'm going to skateboard. And we're like, a skateboarder? And like, you know, he has like 600,000 or 700,000 followers on Instagram. He just did a movie with Johnny Depp's daughter. He got paid $50,000 to go to the parties at the F1 down in Miami because he's friggin' an influencer and he's creating stuff and he's the future, not going to work for like Morgan Stanley or Booz Allen, right? So I miss that. That's my next generation, but I just would encourage all of us to listen like we're doing to those kids and watch and I don't know, and put some money in the till. So that is my investment strategy. We are not analyzing spreadsheets. We're not doing any of that.
And if I could just answer the question as a closing thought. By the way, we've got a panel this afternoon, the democratization of business. If Greg's still here, he should be on that panel because he's going to make it much more interesting than we would. But the right answer is you would give the $100,000 to Greg Kidd.
No, you would
But
not.
he would not take it.
You would not.
He would, and we did ask. We wanted to invest in Hijacker. And so then the next best option, I think, is you would try and monitor his deals and slide some money in. And a couple of them are on the Link2 platform, and Link2 is one of them.
I just have to say, closing thing, like we both worked for Booz Allen, and I came from a very conservative family. My parents went through the Depression, and so when I got a job at Booz Allen, I came back and I told my mom I got a job at Booz Allen. My mom said, "That's great that you got that job because people will always drink." And when I took my first company public, and I came home after, you ring the bell at the NASDAQ, my mom said, Greg, that company you're working for, are they going to give you dental benefits? This is a different world, right? And like our kids' world is a different world. I am not of that world. I'm happy that we're passing it on to that next generation.
Yes.
Final closing commentary from here.
Mike?
Innovative payments in India, right?
Yes.
I mean, in India, the Indian government is the smartest because they have built the rails, right?
They
The
built the
India
rails.
stack. And
Yes.
they have not left any money to be made by the private players. So which is the application layer on the payments.
Yeah.
So, but it has served very well to meet the needs of the public.
Yes.
So any observations on that?
Well, yeah, they're not looking to like extract monopoly rents from the payment system. They're treating it as a public good. I often say like with my investing in Russia, I said like, I always lose all my money in Russia, but boy, I have a good time. And so that's a different model. But in India, they've recognized, just like some countries have recognized health is a public good and you shouldn't like monetize health. Like when I fall off my bike in New Zealand and they fix me, I say it's time to pay. And they're like, what does money have to do with healthcare? And so if you think of payments as like what would be the most efficient mechanism, because everything we do has some form of exchange, and you were running it as a public policy, you might do it like India. And I would suggest there's a lot of value to like can be learned from like what's happened in India for the rest of the world. So.
All right, let's eat lunch. Roll.
No. Thank you.
No?
Thank you. Round of applause.
Thanks.